Hi everyone. This lesson we're going to be setting up our final render pass to help us out in post-production, and this one is going to be the occlusion pass. So to start out, let's go over to our render tab here. We're going to create a copy of this master layer. We just right click on this and choose copy layer. Then we'll get an exact copy of this. And this render layer is going to be for our occlusion. So let's rename this occlusion. And basically how this is going to work is we'll have our beauty pass and all of our other passes rendered out on this master layer, and then we'll add a new material to everything in the scene on this occlusion layer. And basically what you can do here is, if you want to hide geometry or something, you can do that and it'll function independently of this master layer. So you can change the materials and hide and unhide objects, and when you render it out, it'll render out each of these separately. So let's turn this back on. So now we want to actually create our occlusion material. So if we open up the Hypershade, we want to start out by creating a V-Ray light material, and then we want to create a V-Ray dirt texture. So if you just type in dirt over here and then choose this V-Ray dirt, then what we're going to be doing is we're going to drop this V-Ray dirt texture into the color slot of this V-Ray light material. And then we're going to check emit on backside. Then let's go into the properties of the dirt texture. We'll leave all these numbers as they are for now, but we want to check double-sided and work with transparency. And I'm also just going to rename this occlusion material. There we go. And now let's just assign this material to everything in the scene. Okay. Now we can't just render this with the same settings as the master layer, so we're going to have to set up some new render settings specifically for this occlusion layer. Now, one thing we can do, if you apply materials, those will stick to this new layer, but if you want to change any settings, you have to create a layer override for that. So for example, if we want to change this file name, we're going to have to right click on this and choose Create Layer Override. And the text will turn orange, and then you can type in a new name here. So I'm just going to add occlusion after this. And now you'll notice if I switch back to the master layer, we have the original scene name. And if I switch back to the occlusion, we've got the new occlusion name. So we just have to go through the settings and make a few adjustments. So first let's go over to the V-Ray tab and go down to color mapping. We're going to have to change this type here, so create layer override and then switch this to linear multiply. And then we're going to change the gamma to 1, and we're going to turn off linear workflow. And let's go over to the indirect illumination tab. I'm just going to totally turn this off. And then go over to your settings. All this stuff is fine. Let's just go over to the render elements, and we don't need to have all these rendered out twice, so we'll just turn them off. This is one of the things that you actually don't need to create a layer override for. You can just turn them off. And you'll notice if I switch back, these are all turned on, and now these are all turned off. Okay. Then another thing we need to adjust are some of the camera settings. So if we click on our render cam, switch over to the settings here, and then scroll all the way down to the V-Ray attributes. And we want to turn off this physical camera, so let's create an override again and turn it off. And then let's go to the environment. I'm just going to make this white. This one, it really doesn't matter if you create an override for this or not. And lastly, we just need to hide a few things in our scene. We don't need any of the lights, so we'll just hide that whole group. And then in this case, we don't even need these trees. So I'm just going to hide that. So let's just do a quick render of this and see how it's looking. Okay, so this is how it's looking. It's in the right direction, but the distance of this occlusion could be a little bit wider spread, I think. So let's go into the material properties and then go into the dirt settings. And then let's adjust some of these values first. I don't usually like to keep this totally black. I like to keep it just a little bit dark gray. And I'm going to change the radius to 50 and set the fall off to 1. And I'm going to turn up the subdivs to 16 just to kind of smooth it out a little bit better. And then let's do another test of this. Okay, so this is looking a little bit better. If you want to, go even further with this, you could crank this radius up and then do another test. And you can see you're getting a lot more of that occlusion in there. I'm going to keep this fairly close to the edges, so I'm just going to leave this at 50. Okay, now the one problem is I want to be able to see through this glass here and have this occlusion, actually affect what's going on behind there. So instead of just hiding the glass in the scene, I want it to actually work properly with the refraction in that glass. So that means we need to create a new material specifically for that glass. So let's open up our Hypershade again, and let's just create a new V-Ray material. And I'm going to call this occlusion glass. And just set the diffuse color to black, and then turn the refraction all the way up to pure white. And then make sure we check effect shadows and set this to all channels. Then what I'm going to do is just assign this material to the glass elements in our scene. So to these guys, and let's just hide these. And then also to this glass inside here. And that should be good. So let's just do another test and see how this is working. Okay, so this is looking the way that I would like it to be. One last thing to do is for some of these things like lights where you don't really want to see this occlusion on top of this bright white. So what I'm going to do for that is just create a surface shader and just set the color of this to white. And I'm just going to apply this to some of those light objects in our scene. So for example this, and also some of these strip lights in the ceiling. Okay, so now you can see that's white the way we want it to be. And that's basically it for the occlusion. Okay, so now when you render the scene out, as long as both of these have the green check mark, it'll render out both of these layers. You have to render it with the batch render command, but it'll render out your master layer with all the materials applied, and then it'll render out this occlusion pass with this occlusion setup. And that's exactly what we're going for. A lot of times I'll actually just save out a separate file for the occlusion, because as you notice, the setup is a little bit complicated, and it's easy to kind of miss one step or forget to do this override for something, and then you could potentially kind of screw up your whole scene. So I find it easier to just have two separate files for the main render and then for the occlusion pass. But sometimes it's nice to have everything all in one file, and this is how you can do that. So in the next lesson, I'm just going to go over the final render settings, and then we'll render it out.